Welcome to the inaugural episode of Dom's Film Club. Today I'm sitting down with Frosty to discuss one of our favorite childhood movies, The Mask of Zorro. First we're going to go through the fascinating story of the real Zorro, that led to the books, that led to the silent films, and culminated in the 1998 movie that does an amazing job at paying homage to this rich history. We'll also talk about the characters, the script, the production, and the impact Catherine Zeta-Jones had on us as young boys. So sit back, relax, and welcome to my film club. Frosty, welcome to the first ever episode of Dom's Film Club.
Thank you.
Today we're going to talk about one of our favorite movies, The Mask of Zorro. So let's just start off with, what does this movie mean to you?
This is like a childhood favorite film. It's this kind of thing that there's a few selection of films where I can watch it at any point on. If it's on TV, I'll always watch it. It doesn't matter which bit it is. It's one of those films. So it's a feel good film, let's say.
Yeah. Do you remember the first time you watched it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure I would have been 8 because it came out in '98, right?
Yeah.
And I remember seeing it in the cinema with a friend of mine, and I think both mums and maybe my younger brother, who would have been 5, I think, which is I think way too young to be saying this. And I just remember being like blown away by all the sword stuff, because when you're 8, right, that's what you like to see. And I also remember seeing a thing on Blue Peter. There was a whole thing about the film, and they showed the bit where there's like the big fight scene and he's jumping up on the table, fighting off all the guards with the swords. And I remember seeing that before, which maybe I'm like post rationalizing my life here, but I'm sure I would have seen that and then said to my mum, "Can we go and see The Mask of Zorro in the cinema?" Which is clearly what we did. And I also kind of, this is a bit weird, but I also kind of remember being a bit overly stimulated by seeing Catherine Zeta-Jones. Let's leave it in that.
Yeah, that for me, I didn't actually see it when it came out in the cinema. I was looking at pictures recently to try and figure out when it was in time. We were in Switzerland on a family trip, and it's one of those like grown up parties during the day where now I realized that they were drinking and they wanted to get the kids out of the way. And I was like put upstairs in a bedroom, and they like watch this, and they put the Mask of Zorro on. I remember sitting there by myself and being like, oh my god, she is the most beautiful woman in the world. And yeah, that's definitely for a kid. We were 10 years old when this came out. Catherine Zeta-Jones as like a straight young boy is definitely something that sticks with you the most.
Yeah.
But it's surrounded by like a really solid movie, like you say. Like the action is great. You've got to remember this is a pre-superhero era, and the action hero is both good but also fun. And yeah, as we'll talk about today, I think just an all-around well-made movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it has its cheesy elements to it, which you have to take with a little bit of a pinch of salt, given it was made however long ago. I watched it again yesterday, and my half Jenny said, "Oh, this was 20 something years ago." I was like, "Really? Was it?" Oh yeah, yeah, actually, yeah, it is. It's like, whoa, okay. It might kind of make sense, and like it's a '90s film, right? There was some cheesy stuff in there, but it still hits hard on the entertainment, I'd say.
So the cheesiness is actually one point that we'll talk about later, because at various points, I'm gonna talk about the history of Zorro and how actually this movie does such a great job at tying in with so many elements of the history from the real person it was based on, the books, the movies. But one of the big things of both the books and the old movies is that it is super like almost slapstick. Like the first ever Zorro movie was a silent movie, and so it's very physical, it's very silly, the whole swashbuckler thing. And the last time I was watching it, I could really tell that exactly how you say, this super cheesy type of action, and I think it does a great job at doing homage to that, but without being like complete parody in itself.
Well, I'm pleased to say that because I have never really thought about it, like the background or the character, or anything. The bit at the beginning that gives you the blurb and stuff. I've never really liked it. It literally just it's a guy with two swords. Like that is enough for me. Obviously, as a kid, that's what hooked me in. And I've never really looked back and thought, what is this about? So
So
it's. I'm glad you're going to do
I've done
this.
a lot of research. So I've watched this movie probably 15, 20 times in my life. What about you?
Well, I don't know, but probably similar. But one thing I would say, like I said before, I've probably seen it from certain points to the
Yeah, yeah,
end.
yeah.
It's the sort of film on the TV, whatever point it's in, oh, this bit's coming up next, so I'll watch that, and then inevitably you watch the whole thing in full. I don't know. Probably same, yeah.
Well, you've come to the right place then, because so I've watched it a bunch of times, but it's only this last few weeks that I've really gone deep on the research about it. And as I say, it actually gives you a whole other appreciation because you realize that there's actually very few things in it that are random. And actually, there's a couple of points that I didn't actually get, and I'll be curious whether you agree with them when we get to them. But now they make sense because they actually have like a reason.
So I'm gonna have to watch it again,
At some point.
which I will do, obviously.
So if you were to describe this movie to someone who hasn't seen it before, what would be like your quick spoiler free like synopsis about what it's actually about?
I would say, um, at the core of it, it's a film about a hero, right? That's um,
As we'll say later, potentially the first ever superhero, but we'll talk about that later.
a hero seeking revenge, and there's an element of family as well involved. I'd say that's kind of all you would need to know to get started.
Yeah. Well, I guess for someone who knows nothing about Zorro, yeah, it's about a superhero in 1800s Mexico. There's a love story, there's a family story, there's a revenge story. There's a lot of things there, but as you said, it is just a fun movie. It's classed as action, adventure, comedy, and I would say that it absolutely hits all three of those. I was really glad to see that it is classed as a comedy because
Yeah,
it's quite a funny movie.
yeah. That's one thing I picked up on most having rewatched it yesterday. There are funny lines in there that I
Yeah.
hadn't really clocked before. Particularly, I'd say the main villain. I think
Yeah.
he like doesn't get. I don't think he necessarily gets the credit.
Do you mean Raphael or Captain Love?
Well, actually both, but
Both, yeah.
more Raphael. I'd
Yeah.
say he's yeah. I think he maybe is the guy that, well, the actor that I think like came across the best having rewatched it again after a while. Where I thought actually he's really good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we'll talk about that when we talk about the actors, but I think everyone really like does exactly what they were meant to do. So just some quick background. So the movie, as you said, came out in 1998. It was in development for over 6 years. Spielberg was working on it since '92. It got through multiple directors, multiple stars. We'll talk about all the different actors that were associated with this at different points, and then finally got made in '97, released in '98. It had a $95 million budget. Started on a $60 million budget, but it went over. It grossed $250 million. It was the 16th highest grossing movie of that year. 1998 was also the year that Titanic
Yeah.
and Armageddon came out. So what a year for film. I think you said you checked this, but let's see if you can remember slash guess. What do you think the IMDb score? What do you think slash remember that it was?
It was in the sixes, from what I remember.
So 6.8. How
Okay.
do you think that's does it justice?
No, I'd say that's. I think that's fair. Maybe slightly under.
Mm.
I'd say 7 is probably where it should be.
I'm firmly in the Rotten Tomatoes over IMDb camp. Where do you fall? Which one do you prefer as a
Um,
scoring system?
I'd say generally 50-50.
Okay.
I'm happy to take both.
So, and Rotten Tomatoes, critics versus audience. Do you want to
I
guess?
I reckon it critically it's probably not great. An audience is much better, is what I would guess.
So actually, critics 84% and
Okay.
audience 73%. So I was
Oh,
pleasantly surprised
yeah.
by both.
Okay. I wouldn't have expected
I
that.
would have expected the other way
Yeah.
around. But yeah, I think
Okay.
it was well received. I think people appreciated a lot of things we've talked about now of the Roger Ebert talked about the fact that it showed that you can basically have a fun movie, but there's also well made.
Yeah.
So it was appreciated. And then the final thing in our spoiler-free introduction: who would you recommend this to? Like, what would someone have to be in the mood for? Or what kind of person would you be like? You should watch The Mask of Zorro.
Well, it's a pretty universal film. I don't think I think anyone, to be honest. But anyone that's got a particular soft spot for a kind of hero feel good type film. So
I mean, that's pretty
pretty,
universal.
yeah, it's pretty broad. It's not like the sort of thing, the kind of film where you're gonna want to find someone that's specifically gonna like it. It's pretty.
Yeah.
I'd say anyone.
I think it's also very much a movie of our generation. So
Oh yeah,
I know
100%.
my parents watched it and they understood what it meant to me. And it's like it's a good anyone who said this movie is shit is full of it. But
Yeah.
I think from them it was like a young person's movie when they were older. And I feel like
Yeah.
if like for example, when your son grows up, do you think you'll show this to him?
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see if it works or if it's just like very much of its time. But I think especially anyone who watched it, I think a lot of people will have watched this movie 20 years ago
Yeah.
and then now would be like, oh yeah, I haven't watched that. So if that's you and you don't want us to spoil anything, pause this video, this podcast, go and watch it, and then come back to see us talk about everything after the spoiler line. So from now on, everything we say, we're going to talk about the characters, we're going to talk about the story. So if you don't want spoilers, stop watching and stop listening now, because everything from now on is going to be spoiler full. Let's start with the entertainment value of this movie. The reason I always start with this after we pass the spoiler line is because I think that at its core, no matter what, it can be great, crap, everything else we're going to talk about. A movie's got to be entertaining. So, what kind of entertainment do you think this movie gives best?
Well, from my perspective, and I'm gonna when I say my perspective, I mean me as a child.
Yeah.
From when I first watched it, the fighting,
Hmm.
basically and also the stuff like the swinging from the trees and all that sort of stuff at the beginning where the old Zorro is like doing the loop de loop round all those flagpole things, stuff like that. I don't know why, but I've got a real thing for that kind of thing. Um, like a Robin Hood type film. The other thing I'd say as well, just having watched it again yesterday, it really felt to me like a slight rip off of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. It's
Oh,
like
really?
so many similarities between the two, and that obviously came out at the beginning of the 90s. It's like this. It's almost like this is the equivalent of Robin Hood, but in Mexico.
Yeah, they're very much put in the same category because so as we'll talk about later, a lot of superheroes are heavily influenced by Zorro, and the only kind of characters that predate Zorro that Zorro is probably based on are Three Musketeers,
Mm,
Robin Hood, and I'm pretty sure like that's it. Like
mm,
these are all, and obviously Zorro did different things. For example, the whole dual identity, the cave,
yep.
which we'll talk a lot about how that relates to Batman. But yeah, there's definitely, I mean, the swashbuckling genre is very much comes from the Robin Hoods, the Musketeers, and then Zorro. So I don't think they definitely would have been inspired by those movies, not as much as like ripping them off. So it's impossible that there was. It's not impossible there would be similarities, but yeah, the action is definitely very unique, and there are no real movies. The last big movies I can think of that had that type of action was the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Mhm,
That kind of silly, almost slapstick
mm,
action.
yeah. And then the other part of the entertainment bit would definitely be the like the love story.
Yeah.
That's just so entertaining.
The love story, the chemistry those two have.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that extensively later. That kind of links back to I think as we both said, the hook for us as 8, 10-year-old boys watching this was she is so beautiful. But also as we'll talk about, there's a lot more to her character than that.
Yeah.
But it kind of makes that whole scene like at the center of the movie. And then obviously, yeah, her relationship with Antonio Banderas. I found, and I don't have kids yet, and you do, so I'm curious if this last time the whole father daughter relationship
Yeah.
throughout the story like that really last time I watched it that's the one that makes me the most emotional.
That's definitely actually the bit like you mentioned being a dad. The bit that really got me the most. Not that this is a really hit in the feels film at all, but when he loses the
Yeah.
baby, like that's the bit where it's like. But there's also a part of me being the new dad I am, thinking practically like completely stupidly, but well, you got to feed the baby. Like, what's going on here? You can't just take her away. Like, where's she going to get the milk from? She can't sleep with all this fire going.
So the first flaw of this movie is the logistics.
And also, the baby's an amazing actor, but there's a bit where it's like, well, come on, like, this way that baby's way too chilled out.
Yeah, it waits a really long time in the scene to start crying.
Yeah,
There's
I'm like,
like
come
I
on.
think it's mother yeah, the mother gets killed by gunshot
Yeah, I
and then the
think,
house gets sets on fire and then it starts crying.
yeah, well, that's definitely not what my baby would do. But
So yeah, definitely hits the action, hits the feels. The story, which we'll talk about in its own thing, that I think, especially the beginning, is like quite an exciting story. That is he going to escape? Is Don Alejandro gonna manage to like keep his identity secret? Is Captain Love gonna find him? There is like quite like a thrill element to that as well. Um, yeah, emotional, funny action. So overall it hits like a lot
Yeah,
of the main groups.
it's an action film. Like,
Yeah.
that is its thing.
It's an action film, but I think a lot of action movies have the problem that you were talking about going between scenes where you could literally just jump. It's not, I would never just watch like, oh, these are the three main action scenes in the movie.
No.
I think this is me personally. I think for you, the action is very bigger even than it is for me. But for me, it's some of the stuff that happens between the action. I love the training montage scene. Like that's a good
Yeah, well,
one.
I thinking about that yesterday. It felt like this is the bit of the film that I want to see the most, and the film that does it so well, I think, is Batman Begins, because that feels like it's a much more of a long, stretched out process. I don't know why, but I feel like that's the bit that I wanted to see more. It was like so quick. It's like,
Yeah.
how has he got so good so fast?
I literally, so not the last time, the time before I watched it, I thought the exact same thing. And so I timed it this last time, and it's a 3.5 minute montage,
Okay. Yeah.
which actually, that when
Well, yeah.
that sounds all right. But at some point, I'm gonna do like one of our features. I'm gonna time all the famous montages, Rocky, Batman Begins,
Yeah.
and this as well, and see actually like where it ranks. Because I agree, it did feel. I think also because the transformation is so big, he goes from basically being shit at sword fighting to being amazing at it.
Yeah.
So now we'll talk about the story, which I think is always interesting because there are just some movies that the story's just there because, like, you need a story, and really it's just a canvas on which to have, like, especially for an action movie, action scenes to happen. But I think, and again, especially older, rewatching it, I think this is a really solid story, both the character story, but then the background story and like the plot with the buying California
Hmm.
back and everything. So I think the story is great. What were your thoughts on this later rewatch?
Yeah, I would agree. I think I was definitely looking at it through much more of like a critical lens, and the story definitely holds up. It's interesting to the point where when they show the map, I'm like, well, I want to see that map in more detail because I'd love to know, like, and I hope you're going to do this. I'd love to know that like the history behind all of it because I was a little bit confused around the whole Mexico, Spain, California thing. So that's the only bit that I needed to find out a bit more about. But as an overall story, it's pretty solid.
Well, since you ask, I guess this is as good a time as any for me to give you. I'm going to give you the history. I'll start with the history of Zorro and see how it ties in with the history of California. So California was occupied by the Spanish, as is implied by the story, until about 1821, which is when the movie starts. And basically, at that point, Santa Anna, who is a real historical figure, basically claimed Mexico as being independent from, well, they basically took it back from the Spanish in the same way the Americans took the United States back from the British. So that is a real thing that happened. And then, from the 1820s until the 50s, California was part of the new state of Mexico. And basically, in the 40s, there was a war between Mexico and the United States, and the United States won, and they got California as a result of it. So from the 50s forever, California became part of the U.S. And that's all you really need to know for the history.
Yeah.
So you've got
Okay.
Spanish rule, Mexican rule, American rule, and it's very important for what I'm about to say about the history of Zorro. Zorro is based on a real person, a Mexican bandit called Joaquim Murrieta, which, if that name rings a bell, it's because that's the name of Alejandro's brother in the movie.
Okay.
So this is the real person Zorro was based on. His real story was that he was a Mexican miner in California after it became part of the United States and before the gold rush happened. And he was apparently quite a successful miner. There's a 20-minute video about the history of Zorro, which I'll put a link in the description, and it's super interesting and it'll give you far more details than I'm about to do. But so he was a successful miner, and basically, when the gold became known throughout the world and the Americans advertised it, a lot of Americans and people from all around the world came for the gold. And a lot of them didn't have the same success that he had had. So, long story short, they ruined his life. Some stories are that they raped and murdered his wife in front of him, and then abandoned him, and then left him for dead. Others, and both of these might have happened, was that they accused him and his stepbrother of being horse thieves, even though apparently they'd bought the horse legitimately, and then they lynched his brother or stepbrother. Basically, he was left with nothing, and it was all at the hands of American miners. And it was basically the Wild West at the time, and there was no law and order, and definitely not justice for a Mexican miner that had things stolen from by the Americans. So he went on a revenge spree and basically killed all the men who had. I think the main thing was killing his half brother. Um, So yeah, he became this bandit, and then after that, he kept stealing gold from the Americans, from the government, and so he became a bit of a problem. As far as I can tell, there was no stealing from the rich, giving back from the poor, like
Yeah,
with
it
Robin
sounds
Hood.
sounds a bit like a
It
Robin
does.
Hood. Yeah.
I think it's more the fact that he was getting revenge. Apparently, he started getting revenge for other people that were being persecuted by Americans. So he became a bit of a folk hero. And but the Americans sent in the Rangers, headed by Captain Love, the real Captain Love, Captain Harrison Love, and he was sent and he found a group of bandits who they thought were the Morietta. So he had a gang at this point. It wasn't just him. It was the Morietta gang. And there was a guy called Three Finger Jack in the gang. So he's also based on a real person. And Captain Love found them. They killed them. They weren't 100% sure they got the right people because they didn't have photos or anything. But supposedly he killed the real Joaquin Morietta and he chopped off his head
Mm.
and kept it in a bottle of alcohol, which
Oh.
is why they does do that in the movie. That was one of
Yeah.
the things I said earlier that I never fully understand. I get that it makes him seem like a really sick,
Yeah.
evil
Yeah.
puppy,
Yeah.
and we're happy
Yeah.
when he gets killed. But I always found it weird, and then finding out that it was based on history was like super interesting.
I didn't know like any of that. I'd always just assumed that it was just a bit of a made up story.
No,
Even though you get that bit at the beginning, I thought well, maybe they'd made that up as
well,
well.
so the history of that is true, but as I just said, all of this takes place in the 1850s,
Mm.
whereas the movie takes place before that, which is kind of the next chapter. So he supposedly got killed. Some people say that he didn't kill the right guy, so there was like a legend that he was still alive or whatever. But that's pretty much the end of the story for
The 18th
him.
century conspiracy story.
Yeah, exactly. Like if we have conspiracy theories now with the internet and everything, like back then they must have gone absolutely wild. So fast forward to the 1900s, and an American called Johnston McCulley, wrote The Curse of Capistrano, which is the first ever Zorro book. This was published in 1919. It was one of those serials where they put, you put bits in the newspaper week after week, and it was eventually put as a book. So it was heavily based supposedly on the legend of Joaquin Morietta. Joaquin was never known as Zorro, so this is really the beginning of Zorro. Zorro means fox in Spanish and was part of the whole allure that he was able to evade bullets and get away from people.
Okay, so maybe you're going to tell me, but at what point does the whole black mask and hat and stuff?
In the book,
So that's basically fictional, right?
yeah,
It's
that's all
been made
fictional. I
up.
mean, he might have dressed in black and moved around, but yeah, he never had that exact outfit. He never called himself Zorro. I mean, honestly, the character in the book is very different from the historical character, but everyone says that this isn't controversial that he is based on this real life figure because, and this is now important with the movie, the backstory of Zorro in the book is that he is a Spanish nobleman. He's living in Mexico under the occupation of the Spanish and he's Spanish himself. He's basically one of the dons, like we see in the movie. But I mean, this is what De La Vega does in the movie. He's a Spanish nobleman living there, but who empathizes with the Mexican people who are being oppressed by the Spanish. So this American author made the very deliberate choice to take this story and move it back about 30 years because in the real story, the bad guys are the Americans. And in this story, both the book and then in the movie, the bad guys are the Spanish/the Mexicans. So that is an important difference. And that's why when they decided in the movie, obviously it starts in the 20s and then it takes place in the 40s. So that's way before the Americans are actually involved.
Okay.
So the important characters to remember are Joaquin Morietta, the real guy, is Alejandro's brother, who is actually killed at the beginning of the movie. And he's killed by Captain Love, who was based on a real figure. And then De La Vega, Anthony Hopkins's Zorro, is the one from the books. And then so Alejandro as Morietta did not exist in real life, did not exist in the books, but is kind of the one that's invented. So the Mask of Zorro is kind of a reboot of the Zorro story, kind of building off
Hmm.
the book. And one of the things I love about it when you rewatch it is you can really, it almost feels like it's a sequel because there's a lot of references in the first 20 minutes
Hmm.
to the history that Anthony Hopkins and Don Raphael have.
Hmm.
There's obviously the implication that Don Raphael has always been after his wife,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
he's been making his life hell for his whole time,
Yeah.
and that's basically the history of the books. And then the movie is like saying, and this is kind of the post New Zorro thing, and by paying an homage to the real character, they've made him in the movie the brother to the person whose name of the original Zorro. So there's a really nice coming full circle element of the characters.
Wow.
So
That's a
there you
lot. That's a
go.
lot of
Yeah.
information there that I did not know.
And so that brings us to the prologue. So I timed it. It's 18 minutes, like the whole thing basically until we see Antonio Banderas for the first time. It's 18 minutes, and the movie's about 2 hours 18. So basically, you get an 18-minute prologue and then a 2 hour movie. But like, it's a great first 18 minutes.
Yeah,
So much
straight
happens
in. Yeah,
straight in. It's action, feels, drama. And again, a lot of elements are built up for later on. Like just like a few is obviously him and his brother saving Anthony Hopkins as Zorro is like pivotal for the story later on. All of the geopolitical stuff with the Spanish and the Dons and the Mexicans. Then obviously the stuff with the baby and the flowers is
yeah,
like super important later on.
yeah.
So yeah, very strong start.
Yeah, even the very, very, very beginning bit that maybe isn't in every single version, but the where he walks on, right, and does the just the like the iconography of that. That's the sort of thing that would really get me, and it still does now, even as a 30 plus year old. It just looks cool.
You know, I was just thinking what it reminds me of is the James Bond walking
Yeah,
and
it's very
shooting,
similar. Yeah,
which is probably not a coincidence that this director also directed two James Bond movies. But yeah, that like I love things like that at the beginning of the movie when you're watching it with your friends or you're watching it for the 10th, 20th time and it just immediately gives you chills. You're like, yes, I'm
yeah,
ready
yeah.
for
I
this.
think I can just imagine myself as my 8 year old self saying that, just thinking, yes, I'm in.
So yeah, we've talked about like all of the kind of story, the history of the story. Then I was thinking about the kind of the molds of story that are in this. The whole Zorro coming back from the dead and getting revenge is very
Yeah,
Count of Monte Cristo.
yeah,
So that, and then I also like the fact that the whole Alejandro becoming trained to become a nobleman is very My Fair Lady, and
yeah,
that's really funny as well. Seeing him being such a slob in the first half, and also I think
yeah, yeah.
great credit to Antonio Banderas' acting ability.
Oh
The
yeah, he's
the
really
fact that he's able to like just switch in like the second half of the movie, I think is
yeah.
really great.
It obviously is very entertaining, but a bit like the training, it's a bit like how can you go from being one extreme to the other so fast? It's
Yes.
like the whole we need to teach you charm,
Mm.
and then he says something like, "Oh, this is going to take some time," and then
Yeah.
literally he's there and
Yeah.
he's already charming. It's like
So
I could have done with seeing a bit more.
after thinking that the first montage went really quickly, I was kind of grateful that I think it's better that they didn't show it at all. They just went immediately because if they had spent 1 minute doing it, I think we would have the same thing. Is like you can't learn all these manners so quickly. So, and theoretically, we don't know how long it took. Like, if we'll give them credit, we'll say it was a few weeks. But yeah, it is. It's a.
Yeah, I just like to know that, or there to be a communication that it has happened,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
being a
We
bit of a
we
stick.
know that we know that it did happen in some
Yeah,
form.
I don't know.
But yeah, I think when the fact they make a joke about it is them being like, "Hey, we know this is ridiculous, but we're okay with it."
That I would say when I said at the beginning about it, there are certain things you take with a pinch of salt. That was one of them where it's just like, yeah, it's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. I was kind of come up with a system to figure out like whether a story not credible or realistic, but basically try and find what is the biggest coincidence in the movie. Because in some and basically be like how bad is it on a 1 to 10 scale, and like I think I've found one in this, but it's not massive.
Yeah.
But it's um Anthony Hopkins actually bumping into Antonio Banderas because if that doesn't happen, that literally there's no movie.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's.
But it's not. But I think in the grand scheme of coincidences that make a movie happen, it's not that bad. They both had a reason to be in the same city at the same time,
Yeah.
and yeah, then they bumped into each other, which is very convenient.
That is also, and there's also the moment where Elena sees Antonio Banderas for the first time. Not that that is integral to the plot, but it's a bit like, oh, okay.
It is important.
And her being in the church as well when he runs in there to hide.
Yeah, although I think at that point he is stealing horses from like the local, like from the barracks, and the barracks would probably be attached to the palace. So I think they would really be. I think that's less of a coincidence than him bumping into Anthony Hopkins.
There's another very convenient coincidence at that point, which has got nothing to do with the story, but it's just one of those things where you think, "Oh, come on!" Where in that very scene where she sees him stealing a horse, and he like runs off, runs up the stairs, and it just so happens that the sun is right there. So when he sweeps his cape, it's all very like
Yeah, but
dramatic.
stuff like that, it's like
Yeah, but
just
I
to
think
look good.
me and Jenny both at that point just went, "Ah," but you could like, yeah, this just looks cool.
I will say on that scene of the stealing the horse, I was just again 2 hours and 20. If we take out the first 20 as being the prologue, like 2 hours is a bit of a long movie. So whenever something's over 2 hours, I do try and see where could we cut some fat. And I find one of my least favorite scenes is the
I'm really interested to see what you say here because there's a scene that watching it last night I think is just there for fluff.
I think I know which scene it is. So actually, both of mine are related to horses. I don't mind him stealing the horse of it, and I understand that this scene has to exist because he has to meet Elena, and that's totally fine. But the like 3 minutes action scene of him fighting in the barracks at that point, I don't particularly love.
That's too long, and
Yeah.
also
And the
the
teeth thing kind of freaks me out. As a tall person, seeing this poor giant get his face smashed in. But then I'm pretty sure the one you mean, the fluff one, is after he steals the plans. I think it's a 3-4 minute scene where he's on the horses chasing them. Does not serve any purpose.
that was the one where I was like, because I was looking at it a bit more critically, I thought, and also because I hadn't watched it in full for such a long time, I was looking at the length and thought, that's really long. I don't remember it being so long because it's basically a film of moments,
Mm.
really. And whenever I watch it on TV, it's like, oh, I'm waiting for this next bit
Yeah.
because I like this bit here, and that horse bit. Watching it in full, you just think, oh, this is literally just entertainment for
Yeah.
entertainment's sake. And there are some
Was that what you
bits
meant
in
by
it.
the fluff?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And like the bit where the last remaining guy on the horse gets hit by the tree and Zorro jumps over the tree. Like that's entertaining.
Yeah.
As a kid, I'm like, yeah, but now you think.
It's a waste of 5-6 minutes.
And also, I swear when he's stealing the plans, it's all nighttime because you
Yeah.
have the big fire
Yeah.
Z, and then when he's running away, it's all in the day.
So one of my pet peeves with movies, and they all do it, and I'm sure it's just because of the shooting schedule. Whenever something starts at night, and
Yeah,
it can be 11 or 12, by the end of the scene, it's morning. And sometimes the scene can, even in the movie, the scene can have only supposed to have taken half an hour. It'll always be morning. So I think I'm guaranteed that by the end of the scene before the horses, that you can probably see daylight, and the idea is that the scene took all night or whatever. But yeah, even though it only took half an hour. So yeah, that scene serves no purpose. And the other thing is, if they were like, oh, we need some action because there hasn't been any, but this is right after the fight with Elena, which
yeah,
is obviously like one of the highlights of the movie.
yeah.
So yeah, it's completely unnecessary. But you know what? We'll forgive them. We'll give them one pass on that. I think this movie's all around good, but I think the strongest part, the strongest thing is the actors. Like the actors, how well they suit the role, how unique it is to them, and their characters to a certain extent. But yeah, I'd say the actors are the best. So let's start with, even though he was probably the Rock at the time because he was the most famous, he's this is I'm not gonna say he's the most forgettable, but like when you think about who's in this, we think about Catherine Zeta-Jones, then almost obviously Antonio Banderas is the main character, and you almost forget that you have a multiple Oscar-winning, like best actor of his generation, who's kind of like the Rock of the film. So Anthony Hopkins, how old, off the top of your head, how old do you think he was in this?
I actually looked at this yesterday. So he would have been like in his 60s.
Yeah, so which is crazy. Like
Yeah. He looks good.
he looks great.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it later. Because Antonio Banderas is actually now 2 years older than Anthony Hopkins was then, and he does not look nearly as good as Anthony Hopkins did. So yeah, I did some quick research on Anthony Hopkins' career, and he was one of those, like a lot of British actors, where he obviously started over here on this side of the pond, made a lot of stuff, built a reputation, and then like obviously he broke through in Hollywood with Silence of the Lambs is like his most famous movies, which is in '91, so it's only a few years before this.
Yeah.
But he's made, up till right now, he's made 136 movies plus TV shows, 93 movies as of now, and he's still going. He's got
Oh,
a
yeah.
Oscar nominated movie that's out at the moment, and this was his 40th movie. So this is right before halfway through his like full movie career. But I'd say he's probably like, I mean, he's obviously the star of the movie when it came out, fame wise. But yeah, he's at his peak, and he's amazing.
Yeah.
Like he makes the character his own. The confidence, the suave, the humor, the charm, but also like the sternness and stuff. And he's like, if yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah. I think I probably like him of all the characters. I think he is the best for me. Even though the two younger main characters, you think
More exciting,
they're
but
the more
he's
exciting ones. But Anthony Hopkins, he's just so good at it. I don't know what it is. It's hard to describe why he's so good, but he suits it so well. It's really I don't really know why. I can't really explain it.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I mean, he is just an amazing actor, and he just makes it his own. So then, and I think one of the things and why it works so well, like their chemistry with Antonio Banderas is amazing, as we talked about, like, but in a completely different way. Like they could not be more different as Zorros. Obviously, um, there he does try to emulate him, and apparently this is one thing from the silent movies that one of the staples. Zorro always smiled when he sword fights,
Right.
and I not something you would notice unless you knew it. But last time I watched it, I did notice that both Anthony Hopkins at the beginning and then Antonio Banderas later on, they do make a point of smiling all the time when they're like sword fighting. So that style like he emulates it, but outside of that, they're very different. The in the books, so I forgot to say earlier, so I started reading the book The Curse of Capistrano. Honestly, I'm not recommending it. It's you can tell that it was written over 100 years ago. It's just super corny.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've read a few chapters and I will not be reading anymore. But one of the key things in that version of Zorro, so this is the De La Vega Zorro, is that he is Zorro, obviously, when he's got the mask on, but then he plays this sort of like not oafish, but like a super soft, silly nobleman. And that's when I realized again when he plays Don Alejandro, he's trying to emulate that. You know how he always makes joke about, oh, I don't want to dirty my pants and I don't want to sweat too much and stuff like that. Again, that comes straight from the book about one of the things to hide his identity
Yeah.
in the book.
Yeah.
Zorro would pretend to sort of be this like super again, just like Bruce Wayne with Batman. He makes a point of being like, oh, I'm just a rich guy that doesn't like to get my hands dirty. So exactly like Zorro.
The one thing I was just thinking about there, just to go off topic slightly, and it's a question for you. At what point do you think Captain Love actually knows that Zorro is Don Alejandro? Because
I
there are moments where you
yeah.
think maybe it's now, but then when you see Zorro with the mask on, you think, well, like he looks so much like him. Like
Yeah, but
it's not much of a disguise.
yeah, but that's oh, so actually the big thing about that though is that when he's Zorro, he's clean shaven, and when he's Don Alejandro, he's got the like
Yeah,
little
but
mustache
he's
and stuff.
tiny.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, we live in a world where we accept that Superman is Clark Kent, like people can tell
Yeah. Oh,
different.
yeah. You
We
again, you take
accept
it with a
that.
pinch of
But to
salt.
answer your question and more seriously, he tells him with the whole head in the bowl thing that whether you're him or not. So he's basically saying, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure you're him, but I
Yeah.
can't prove it. Plus, he does a really good job at hiding it by drinking the alcohol that his brother's head was in. Um, I don't think he knows for sure until he tells him in the showdown at the end. But Captain Love kind of says he's like, I don't. It doesn't really matter whether you're him or not. Like I know that you're trouble.
Yeah. It's just because at the end with the whole death
Yes.
stab, the way that he's like, you think, oh, is he just realizing now, or
No, he definitely knows it because he makes a joke at one point, Captain Love, your brother would have shot himself by now. So he does, and Antonio Banderas definitely confirms during the fight that he is. So yeah, I think that final fight he knows 100%. So actually, we'll keep some. Well, let's just a couple words on Antonio Banderas' career. So he was acting. He started acting in the 80s in his early 20s, but he's not Mexican. He is actually Spanish, and he started off mostly in Spanish movies. Then he made his way into American movies. I completely forgotten this. He was in Philadelphia, the Denzel Tom Hanks movie where he
I'm not seeing
plays.
that.
Oh, it's very good. Yeah, it's. Antonio Banderas is definitely the weaker of the three, but Antonio Banderas, Tom Hanks, Denzel Washington. He plays Tom Hanks' boyfriend in it. You know the premise, right?
No, I literally know nothing about
It's
it.
about a gay man having HIV. So it's not a happy movie, but it is amazing. So he's in that. I think that was his big breakthrough onto like the US, into Hollywood. Then he was in Interview with Vampires, Desperado with Robert Rodriguez, who was actually originally at one point supposed to direct The Mask of Zorro. He's the one who brought Antonio Banderas on, but then he moved on. And then Zorro in 96, and I think this is his signature movie. He's been in loads of stuff, he's still around, but I think this is definitely the thing he's most famous for. We were talking about the bat. I think we'll keep Catherine Zeta-Jones best for last. But the villains, so you talked about how Dom Raphael, I checked the actor's bio, he hasn't really been in anything particularly
Yeah,
like
I've not seen
notable.
him in anything
No.
else. Because I've not seen him in anything else. You only think of him as being that character.
Yeah.
He's just so cold, so cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he comes across so well,
Yeah.
and like really believe you really fucking hate him, basically.
And him and Captain Love are kind of two sides of the same coin. Like, obviously, they're both evil,
Yeah,
but like Captain Love is much more like he's disgusting. Like
yeah,
he will chop someone's head
yeah.
off,
It's just weird.
and And whereas Don Raphael's more of like a distance guy. But that conversation they have, I think the most important conversation about how evil they are is obviously when they talk about blowing up the mine and just killing all these people. And Captain Love's basically like, let's kill all those people. And Don Raphael's like, well, okay, if we have to. Like, he's very much like a pragmatist, like evil
Yeah.
pragmatist.
There's a moment where Don Alejandro turns up to his house and tries to get invited, and
Yes.
he's trying to like charm him with all this
Yes.
stuff about the Queen and all the rest of it. And the bit where you can just sense his ego, like he's flipping
Yes.
between like is this
100%.
right or not, and the way that he does that, the way he acts that is really really good. It's so believable.
Yeah, that's a great point on both their parts because that the movie could fall apart there, be like, this is ridiculous. Why would he do this? But both the actor and then also stuff that's been said about him, about exactly you say, he's so driven by ego, he's a pure nobleman and everything. And say so the first step is getting invited to the party. The second step later on in the party is when they're like, don't let him out of your sight. After
Yeah,
the dance sequence,
yeah,
um, he talks to him and he's about to leave him, and then he says, oh, I would love to introduce you to court.
yeah.
And he's like, okay, well, let me bring you along. And again, that's key. If that doesn't work, the whole thing after that is ridiculous. But it's perfectly credible that he would just let this complete stranger into this meeting because he's an egomaniac.
Yeah. I think just going back to the coincidence bit, I think that there's a few little coincidence bits in that whole party scene where he manages to end up in the room with all the dons and everything. I think the dance bit grabbing his attention to make sure that he sees what's going on, like how like they're just how do they know how to do that dance like that?
I mean, again,
You could argue that is fluff because you don't really need that, but it's so good
yeah,
that and it does like help with the whole relationship between the two of them and the mystery, her not really knowing who this guy is, and he's a kind of bit of a arrogant guy but
yeah,
also very intriguing, and there's a bit of mystery there, so and
two
you
different
sense that in the
people. It's
way
just
that
as
they're
they're
like the way they move, the way they dance, there is that like push and pull
oh,
thing, which is
it's
really
beautiful.
it's great, but you could argue that that's you
Yeah,
know
but I put this in the same category as you were saying the shot with the sun in the background. You accept that there are certain
yeah,
artistic liberties
do.
that that's how they get it. And yeah, and I guess the idea is that he guess he learned how to dance as well. Part of his the montage.
How do they both know
No,
how to do
again,
this?
any dance scene where two people have never danced before. Well, I guess like certain salsa people, but a very particularly choreographed dance like that. I mean, when you see,
No
I don't
choreograph.
know about this one, but you always hear about a movie. Oh, they trained for like 3 weeks to like
Yeah.
get this right, and it's like, oh, but in the movie they're supposed to have just done it. But that's just it's just fun.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So speaking, well, so again, Captain Love, obviously he's horrible, horrendous, but like great villain as well because you hate him, and I mean anyone that you can hate so much that you're happy when they die, and the way he dies,
Yeah.
like destroyed by that's it, both of their deaths. It's Don Raphael and all the gold get dropped onto Captain Love, is like
It's a good way to go. Or well,
wow,
if
terrible.
maybe not. But that thing that stands out with Captain Up for me is the dissonance between his character and what he looks like. It looks like he should be Prince
Yeah,
Charming with his long blonde hair and like perfectly cut beard and everything. You think, oh, he should be the hero. He looks like the hero.
yeah,
You take away the uniform, he looks like the good guy. But he's so like
yeah.
twisted and evil. It's just a weird. It's a bit of a weird choice. I think it works.
Oh, I think it's great. If he was just kind of some ugly sick guy, he'd be like so forgettable. But and I think he's perfectly cast. He's great. Maybe one of the reasons they needed him to be handsome is because he is meant to be a potential romantic alternative
That's
to
true.
Elena.
That's true.
But I mean, that's not critical for the story. But yeah, he's an interesting bad guy. And then when you find out that he's based on a real person, he's even more interesting. I'm not gonna bore the viewers with this story, but I have to tell you the story of the real Captain Love and how he died because he did not. He might not be crushed up by gold, but he did not go down in a very particularly glorious way.
Okay.
But now let's get to the star of the movie, Elena,
Yeah.
Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Yeah.
She was 27 when this movie
Yeah.
came
I
out.
looked at this yesterday. Yeah.
It was her sixth movie. She'd mostly been so she's for those that don't know, she is Welsh, just like Anthony Hopkins.
Yes.
The character, so Anthony Hopkins' character is meant to be of Spanish descent, and so she's as well. Obviously, and Anthony Hopkins doesn't even try to put on any sort of accent.
Yeah. So that this is another one of those things where I couldn't help but think of Robin Hood because one of the things that gets leveled at that film is Kevin Costner's pathetic accent.
I watched it recently. Does he try and do an accent, or does he just stay full
I think
American?
he just can't bish
Yeah.
bothered.
I prefer when they just don't bother than when they try and it's shit.
Yeah, I would go with that, but also it feels weird for what is you think of Robin Hood as being like a very British thing,
Hmm.
and Anthony Hopkins is a similar vibe where you think this is weird that this Zorro character would just be quite quintessentially English,
Yeah.
even though
Well,
he's
I
Welsh.
mean, Don Raphael speaks again. He's a
Yeah,
British actor and he
it's
speaks
it's
that
a
way.
bit weird,
Yeah,
but
but I think
again,
it's
you
less distracting if they try and do a bad one. Obviously, Elena, so her character is meant to have grown up in Spain. She speaks with a Spanish accent,
yeah,
which it's not perfect, but it's not
it's
bad.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's fine. I
it
think it's
passes.
fine.
It
It's
definitely
fine.
passes.
Apparently, after the movie, a lot of people thought she genuinely was Spanish or Latina, and I mean, I
Yeah,
think
you
I did
would.
for years.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't seem like she's Welsh or whatever. But so she'd come up on the British scene as well. Apparently, the thing that got her in the movie is that she was in a TV version of Titanic. So this is before the movie that we know, and Spielberg saw her in that in '96 and was like, she's right for this. And obviously, this was her big like coming out moment. I mean, again, Banderas had been in some big movies, but she had been in nothing major. So she comes out on this, and just everyone is like, and yeah, she's been my favorite actress since then. Yeah, and her character, obviously, as children, as boys, we're like, oh my god, she's like so pretty and stuff. But like her character is like solid as well. Um, I guess, yeah, maybe now is the time to we'll address the one issue. We'll say we'll put our woke hats on for a second. Is if this movie was remade today, would they let's say someone put the exact same script and like redo it, like, and it's like, but do we need to like update anything? Would they change anything to that the dress scene?
I don't know, but she's a little bit too damsel in distress for a lot of it. But maybe that's just they're trying to get across the hold over her that not father does.
I feel like the damsel in distress thing, and most of the work is done to not have that. With the fact that she holds her own in the fight, she like stands up for herself at the dinner
Yeah,
table,
that
political
really
thing.
like
So I think she's
helps.
quite as like a feminist character. She is like quite good considering this is the '90s. Obviously, the one thing is that after the fight is that she ends up basically butt naked, but I could never say, oh, they should just not do that scene because it's such an iconic scene.
Yeah,
My idea to fix it is that there basically needs to be an equivalent scene where Antonio Banderas gets like some, half naked or whatever. And I was either she slices his shirt open during the fight or
yeah,
something, so
yeah,
he's like bare chested. This is if someone was remaking it now and they were saying, how do we fix that scene? I'd say you just kind of have to even the playing field by have his like body be put on show for
yeah,
like, and I'm sure the women wouldn't argue with that. But yeah, you have to have that because it's it's sexy, it's funny, it's just kind of this bonding moment between the two of them. But yeah, it's very erotic.
it is rather, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it
um
is iconic. It definitely
oh,
is.
it is.
When you think about the scenes that you remember most, I think that's definitely one that comes up
Yeah.
because it's not the kind of thing that you don't see too much of that.
No,
It's just
it's
it was quite an original idea.
oh, definitely. I can't actually think a lot of the time things like that someone has tried to imitate them or spoof them or something. But I actually can't. I'm sure it's been done, but I can't think of any other movie that sort of like imitated that.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue it's not completely tasteless in that it's just not too much on show.
Yeah,
That's
she
very
her
good.
boobs are covered.
So
But yeah, yeah. And so her character, obviously, she is a strong, independent woman despite her father not liking it, and that before any of this happens. But then she does piece together um the fact that maybe her father isn't who he said he is. Story plus her. I think one question is when there's a confrontation between her, Don Raphael, Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins kind of comes to take her. They have you know the scene I'm talking about,
mm,
like when the three of them are there. There's like swords out, there's guns out, and basically Anthony Hopkins says, "I've you're my daughter. Who do you believe?"
yeah,
And she disarms. I think she basically doesn't quite believe him at that point, and she's like, "Just put the sword down or whatever."
yeah,
And then there's the whole flower thing.
yeah.
Some people might say, "Oh, she should have known," but basically, do you think that plays out the way it should? That she doesn't actually believe it or fully realize until the flower thing. I think it's perfect. I think it
Yeah, I
works.
think it does
Yeah,
work.
I
Yeah, I
think
don't
so.
think you need to change it. The one bit that I quite liked just rewatching it is there is like the mirroring of what happened to her mum and the way that she
Oh
died,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
her
yeah,
jumping,
yeah.
and you can really see in the
Yes,
way that Montero like reacts really
yes,
like no, and it's almost like a flashback moment, and
yeah.
that's
100.
that I think
That's
that
great.
was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
nice way to do that, or like treat that scene.
That's another interesting. We talked about him already, but the Don Raphael thing. Obviously, he's evil and terrible, but he does well. It seems for most of the movie that he does genuinely love her,
Yeah,
but then obviously the thing at the end. Yeah, do you think? Here's a question. At the end, when he basically pretends that he's threatening her, and then at the mine,
yeah, yeah,
and
oh
then
yeah, yeah.
Hopkins puts his sword down, and then he says, "You really think I would have hurt my own daughter?" Do you think he would have hurt his own daughter?
Oh, that is a good question. I No, I don't think he would. Cause there is, you do get the sense that he does love, but then you think like that is weird relationship to have.
Oh yeah, I think he's definitely evil, and I don't think he would have hurt her. But the fact that he would even pretend to is
Oh
kind of the final nail for her, where she's like, "Fuck this guy." Yeah, because I
yeah,
think because that's it. She stops Anthony Hopkins from, even at that point, even though she knows, she still stops Anthony Hopkins from killing him for a second time
yeah,
because she's like, "Yeah, he still brought me up." But yeah, the reason I brought it up is because I feel like some people are, oh, this it's silly that she doesn't like realize this sooner or blah blah. But it's a huge thing to realize that the person who raised you.
yeah. I think
So
yeah. Looking at it again, it's got a lot to unpick there,
yes, yeah, yeah,
but which they don't really like go into in too much detail, other than her going on this process of finding out via
yeah.
what's his face, just slowly like
Mhm.
hinting of
Yeah,
who
yeah,
he is.
definitely. Yeah, and he does it well of not throwing it in her face. Oh, here's another fun tidbit. The so Anthony Hopkins when he's undercover, he's referred to as Bernardo, and
Yes.
Bernardo is the butler in the original book.
Okay. Oh.
Obviously in the book he's just the butler, but also a lot of people again the similarities with Batman are like infinite. But a lot of people say that the Bernardo character in the books is what Alfred is based on in the Batman story. Let's move on to the dialogue and the script. So we've already mentioned a couple of times that this is definitely an above, like way above average script. It's one thing I read that was interesting was apparently the script, as I said, it was developed for years and years. It was agreed upon. They brought the cast on, but then sort of at the last minute, they brought in his name was David S. Ward. He was a two-time, or I don't know if he was at the time, but he's a two-time Oscar-nominated screenwriter, and he rewrote 85% of the script, so of the dialogue specifically.
Right.
And rewatching it, I feel like you can definitely see scenes that are the lines are punchy, and you can be like, yeah, I could see how this is probably a shit script, not shit script, but the lines were boring, and he was like, literally, like, let me just rewrite this one line, and it was like, that is so much better and so much funnier.
The thing that I think of when you describe that is I can't remember which one. It might be the most recent one, but one of the James Bond films,
Mm.
and is it Phoebe Waller-Bridge had an influence on it,
Yeah.
and watching it you could hear which bits because having watched things like Fleabag,
Hmm.
you know what her style
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
and then watching the James Bond film, you can hear lines that you think that's definitely her.
yeah.
So I can imagine a lot of this will come from him.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite quotes or lines in the film?
Do you know, there's not. I wouldn't say there's too many ones that I remember that are stuck in my head. The only one that comes to mind that I'm just thinking about a little bit of cheesiness, and the only line that made me go ooh was at the end in when they're having the fight between Captain Love and Zorro is when I can't remember what Zorro says, but Captain Love ends up saying, "I think it's two men." One day. And it's like, what the hell? That's such a weird thing to
Yeah,
say.
that was probably the 15% that the guy didn't rewrite.
Yeah, but I think most of the quotable lines come from the two Zorros. The way I think going back to Anthony Hopkins' performance, a lot of the good lines
Mm.
come from the way that he delivers
Yes.
them. Things like the charm.
Yes.
He's
Oh,
just
that.
so chilled, and the way he really calmly says stuff. It just comes across so smooth, so smooth, and I think that a lot of the comedy lines come from Antonio Banderas and his like kind of manic energy
Mm.
and like overzealousness.
Well, I think yeah, the I think it's it's I think it's good lines, and then as we've just talked about, it's good actors and good like. So I think Don Rafael and De La Vega have some good back and forth because they just got this tension.
Yeah.
Then Anthony Hopkins and Antonio Banderas, like I think they're most of the comic lines is between the two of them because they're just like butting heads constantly. Then some like one of my favorite lines is between Elena and Antonio Banderas during the fight. I think it's at the end when she says, "I may scream," and he says, "Sometimes I have that effect on people."
Yeah, that's that you've. I've just thought of another. Just rewinding back to, if we were to look at this through a 21st century lens, the bit that I think you would, I would like to get rid of is him kissing her, it during the fight scene.
But she kisses him back. The
You,
first he kisses
I don't
her.
like that. I don't. Looking at that again, like it makes me think of the Spanish FA president guy. Like it's just an unwarranted kiss.
I get you, and I think the thing to me that makes it okay is that like literally a second later she does the exact. And I think if you did it now, she would kiss him
Yeah,
first.
I
Yeah,
think you
yeah,
would have to do that. It's just a bit.
yeah. No, I get
I
you.
was a
Yeah,
that was did take me back a little bit because I'd forgotten about that, and it did make me think. Oh, yeah,
yeah. But yeah, I think you have her kiss him first.
yeah.
But yeah, that was definitely a trope back then of kissing the but another great line when Antonio Banderas comes to break up the dancing and Captain Love says the lady and I were trying to dance.
You were trying, yeah,
The lady was
yeah. That
succeeded.
was it.
The others I have written down are right at the beginning with the two brothers when they come and steal the gold from the troops, and one of the soldiers says, "I thought you were tied up," and the brother says, "That's because you are stupid." Like nothing sophisticated or whatever, but like that's just funny. And then there are some lines I won't read them out, but I feel like some of the dramatic lines between like at the beginning with like Don Rafael that he says something about like I want you to suffer knowing that your child should have been mine. It's like, oh god, some of these lines are really brutal.
Yeah,
And then one just a fun fact on the dialogue in the script is that the apparently some parts were rewritten because Antonio Banderas' English wasn't like quite 100%. So there were just certain words that he didn't feel comfortable saying, so they would like write around that.
that's interesting. But you really don't get a sense of that at all. Like he's
Well, I think it's part of the character because he's this sort of like not buffoon, but because he's like struggling with stuff. The fact that his English isn't perfect definitely adds to it. Which, when we do the recasting, I think is going to be an interesting thing. Is I think having someone who naturally isn't 100% comfortable. I love that you said manic energy because that is exactly like
yeah,
to describe his energy. Except when he's pretending to be the nobleman and he represses all that.
yeah. Which is why it's like, how has he done this?
Yeah.
Because you just don't see any of that before.
Well, that like a lot of the time with an actor, if let's just put aside like people who are just bad, but when someone's good, the question is always, are you a good actor or is this just you and you're just playing you on screen? And for me, as soon as an actor can show whether it's in the same movie or in different range about playing two completely different things, but when it's the same movie, it's even more on display. I'm like, no, you're just a good actor, and yeah. So if I mean, I guess if he's not manic like that, which he probably isn't, is like he's just turning it on for those bits and turning it off for others. Let's move on to the production. So, just another, it's not the first thing you would think of, but this movie is really well made. This is before the superhero CGI everything effect. Apparently, a lot of people assume that the mine scene is a lot of CGI, but it's pretty much all practical effects. So they really blow
Yeah,
stuff up.
yeah, yeah.
They film everything on location. So we talked about the fight scenes, like they're great. They're well choreographed. The costumes are beautiful. It doesn't feel cheap. I think, especially back then, a lot like sometimes when you'll see movies of that era or like any time before, like let's say the 1900s, and the costumes look cheap and it looks like not well made, but it's Elena's dresses, that was another thing. Like every scene she's just wearing one more beautiful dress after the other, and because it takes place in the past, I think it's quite timeless.
Mm.
Like I think I'd be curious to see like when our kids watch this, if you say when do you think this was made, if they'd be like, I don't know, 10 years ago, or if they would know. Maybe from the quality of the picture they would know that it was a bit older, but I think from the way it's made, it really holds up.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about CGI because you don't really think that there's going to be any in there, and they could have easily done that, but
Oh yeah,
choice to have not done any of it. Yeah,
it
I hadn't
feels
really
yeah,
thought about
it
that.
feels practical. You can feel people
Yeah,
falling off
it does feel
horses.
real. It really does feel real, especially the bit where everyone's locked in the mine bit.
Yeah.
That's like, oh yeah,
And then the music is just like yeah, I can hear. I mean, I literally just watched it, but there's just so many. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's one of those movies where there's some sort of music playing like 90% of the time. Whether it's sometimes they just use it for like dramatic effects, sometimes they use it like the funny moments. There's a very particular type of music that plays. Obviously, the Zorro tune plays for like a lot of it, and yeah, it's just a you really appreciate in something like this that it's always there, and that if you took out the music, it just wouldn't have the same feel.
Yeah, it really suits it. I also like the just the general sounds. I'm not going to be able to replicate it, but it's like a hollow wood blow sound that runs through the whole thing.
Oh, I know what you mean. It's Captain Love's noise, isn't it? It's like yeah, it's like a fluty whistle.
Yeah,
Yeah, does
but
it?
like a haunting.
Yeah, but doesn't it play like you when right when Captain Love and his cavalry appear? I think it
Yeah,
plays
that
then.
kind of thing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I love when there's a sound or a tune that signals that a character's coming in, and I think it plays every time he does. Yeah, I know exactly the sound you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
that's
a
epic.
theme of a noise, and it definitely helps just tie everything together.
Yeah, absolutely. To kind of wrap up our analysis of it, so we've talked about like concrete categories and stuff, but now I just want to end with what makes this movie special to us, kind of using the stuff that we've talked about. Why does this movie have a special place in your heart?
I think the core of it is the hero element, the guy doing good for the people because that's what he believes in, and doing it with it's like chasing this girl as well. That is what really does it for me. And also another little element added into that is the way that he looks. It's such an
Oh,
aspirational
yeah.
character as a young boy. You just think I want to be Zorro
Yeah,
so much. That I think that is it. If I were to
that's a
boil it
great
down
point.
to what makes me love this film, it's just it reminds me of being young and wanting to be Zorro.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's a very yeah, you're it's such an interesting point because it's a very it's a very not basic sounds like negative, but
Yeah.
it's a very simple, idealistic
Yeah.
vision with a lot of superheroes. But it absolutely appeals to like 8, 10 year old boys, which we were. But yeah, it's a very idealistic, aspirational person to be. And I think one of the great things is that obviously Antonio Banderas, this actor, starts off way off. Like he starts off being a real piece of shit. Like he's a thief, he's a drunk. He's like broken because of his brother. But we see his transformation and turn it into this sort of icon, like you describe. And
Yeah, and this is probably unintentional, but at the very beginning scene with Anthony Hopkins as Zorro and the two young boys watching, it's like you're one of the boys watching
yes,
Zorro, and you're like, yeah, I could be him, or I'm. You want to like follow in the way that the film plays out as those characters.
the again I read this somewhere and I noticed it the last time, but you were talking about maybe slightly corny like directing things. Is that first scene is they cut the holes in the thing to look through,
Yeah,
which is obviously foreshadowing the kid becoming Zorro.
yeah, yeah. I
But
don't
like
mind that.
it's cute.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
yeah,
mind
it's
that. That was
cute.
good.
But yeah, like as I said, I'm not gonna try and become too fancy. But for me, the first thing was just like Catherine Zeta-Jones on screen was just like a revelation to me. I'm not gonna try and be fancy. I love. I think, but that's what I love about movies is that they bring you in for like for one thing, and then you're hooked because of that, and you rewatch the movie over and over, and your like appreciation like expands. And I kind of like that's how I feel. Like actually, this was not a deliberate metaphor, but the circles with the training, it's like for me, Catherine Zeta-Jones is like the circle. But the more I watch it, the more the world expands. I mean, now I've learned all of this history, and as I said, like I found this is only the last time I watched it that I realized that all of these little details tie into the bigger history of Zorro and of Mexico. And I think that's what a lot of good movies do. It's you can't hook everyone with everything is and for some people it might be the Zorro character it worked for you for it might be the beautiful woman for someone it might be like oh I live in California it's the history of that and a good movie does is that it hooks you with one thing but then the more you watch it the more you appreciate everything and that's why if it's well done that works and if it's not it can be very disappointing to be like nope that was just the hook that was the only thing I
Yeah,
liked
yeah, yeah.
but yeah it's a easy to watch easy to enjoy movie yeah it's just great.
Yeah, agreed.
Where so when we do so I picked this movie and I knew that you loved it, which is why I asked you to do it with me. Um, when it's a movie that I pick, I'm gonna kind of over time try and build my top 100 ranking.
Okay,
Obviously, this is the first episode, but I'm gonna give it a rank,
okay.
and then basically over time. So theoretically, if I do 150 movies, then I'll be like, okay, I'll put this somewhere, but then gradually I can move movies up and down. Like say I got so I'm gonna put it at number 30 as a starting point.
Okay, yeah,
But
that
theoretically,
feels
if I
good.
did 40 of the movies that I prefer, I could push it down. So I'm putting it at number 30, my top 100.
Okay.
Where would it rank for you?
It's difficult because you almost need like a list of films that I
Oh yeah,
think are
I know,
brilliant,
but that's why
but
you're roughly doing it.
because it's got such a sentiment, it's got such sentimental
Yeah, and I'm
value.
very much talking my 30 is very much from
Yeah,
my point of view. I'm not saying it's the 30th greatest. I'm not saying it's
yeah,
the 30th greatest
exactly,
movie of
yeah,
all time.
because it's definitely not
No.
that. But yeah, on the favorites list, it has to get in there in the top. I think it's got to feature in the top 30. I'll put it at, this is really hard because there's so many to squeeze in, but I'll put it at number 20,
Okay,
which
fair
is
enough.
really high
Yeah, it
in the
is.
scheme of things.
But
That's
it shows I
really
chose
high.
the right person to talk about this movie with.
Yeah, maybe that's ridiculous, but it does have to because whatever the film is now, and whatever I think of it as a 34-year-old or 30, I don't even know how old I am. You you can't take away the fact that I loved it that much when I was
Hmm.
10, 12, 14, like all through those periods. So
And you still enjoy it now because
yeah,
there are movies that I've felt that way, not stronger than this, but I watch now and I'm like, yeah, I get why I liked it as a kid, but it's not very good now. And you just that doesn't this yeah that doesn't happen with this one.
no, it doesn't. No.
And I mean, yeah, here's another big one of way of thinking about it is if I hadn't watched this movie, like if someone told me about it now and I'd never seen it before, I would be a different person. Like, we'll see. Maybe
This is bold, Clay.
well, okay, I'll tell you this. Maybe I'll cut this one out, but like, I think one of the reasons why my type is brunettes is because of Catherine Zeta-Jones in this movie.
I
Like
don't
for
think
me,
so.
for me, genuinely, for me,
Yeah.
this movie defined like a standard of beauty in women. It did for me. I'm not again. I'm not saying this is the bar, but I was like this as an 8-year old, as a 10-year old boy.
I think
I was like, this is what I think, and I think every boy has. Every person at some point, whatever your gender and whatever gender you're into, I think at some point someone has an image. Like for a lot of guys, it was Megan Fox in Transformers. This is like what I consider to be what I'm attracted to, and I know that
yeah,
for me, that was this with Catherine Zeta, which I know can
that's
seem like
fair.
that can seem like quite basic based on everything we've talked about, but like that was something that was like important for me, and I would be a yeah. It was so it's
Yeah.
it was a formative movie.
Yeah, a similar kind of thing for me as well. The other to go off onto a different movie,
Go
just very
for it.
very briefly. The other character that did that for me was Cameron Diaz in The Mask. Same sort of
Yeah,
time, I believe, like mid 90s, maybe.
94.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, a bit
yeah.
earlier, but yeah, her in the Mask was definitely. I think that yeah, that was probably
That
the I definitely wouldn't have watched that when it came out. So yeah, the reason I'm thinking they came out at the same time is probably because I watched them
Yeah,
then.
but that's because I only watched The Mask for the first time literally last year.
That would be so weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Such a weird experience.
Exactly. That's
Because
exactly what it
I
was.
have not seen that film for a long time, but I can imagine watching that now, thinking, "Ooh, this is weird."
Yeah, it is very weird.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so that's enough with the serious stuff. Now we're gonna do the fun stuff. Okay, so it's 7 questions that follow the 7 categories we talk about. Sunita in the pilot episode got 6 out of 7, so no pressure,
Okay, good.
and they are meant to be quite hard. So she just did really well.
Oh God,
So, first question on the background of the movie. What was the show, the British show that made Catherine Zeta-Jones famous? I deliberately didn't bring it up earlier.
I have no idea.
Darling Buds of May.
Oh, I've heard of that,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't have. I would never have been able to guess that. No.
So, on the story front, why do Don Raphael and Captain Love decide to blow up the mine?
To cover the fact that they're using gold from the guy they're trying to buy it off.
Yep. Uh, Actors. How many Oscars do Anthony Hopkins, Antonio Banderas, and Catherine Zeta-Jones have between them as of now? Oscar wins.
Oscar wins. Well, I don't know. Like the only one of those three that I know is one Oscar is Anthony Hopkins. So I'll say three.
Yeah, it is 3.
Oh, good
But
guess.
it's
That was it. That was a guess.
so you win. Anthony Hopkins has 2. Catherine Zeta-Jones won one for Chicago.
Yeah.
Also, her only nomination. I couldn't find. She's never
Okay.
been. So yeah.
Chicago.
Uh, Dialogue. We actually talked about this one. What makes Elena realize that De La Vega is her father?
The flowers.
Yeah. Do you bonus point if you can name the flower?
Oh no.
Okay.
Did you have it?
Yeah, Romnea.
Yeah, I never
But you can
get
still
that.
get it. Concave brand tracking questions. Are there any brands in this movie?
Okay, you got to assume no.
Okay. I am not finished checking, so we're gonna say no, and we're just gonna show an image of the brand and telling me that I'm wrong if there are in fact some.
It's unlikely you're going to see an iPhone in this film, right?
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking it might be an old barrel of like some whiskey or like something. Production. How much? I told you this at the beginning. How much did this movie gross?
What did you use? 250 million?
Yeah, good memory.
Oh,
Okay, final question, probably the hardest. What is the title and year of release of the sequel to The Mask of Zorro?
um, it's called The Legend of Zorro.
Mm-hmm. But you need both to get the point.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I've seen it, to be honest.
I've seen it once. It's terrible.
Yeah, I remember watching some of it and thinking this is absolute shit.
Yeah, it's a real shame.
I would say probably not that long after. I'm quite good with years, so I'll be gutted if I don't get this right, but I'm going to say 2002.
2005.
Shit on it. That's quite a lot later, actually.
We'll give you half.
5.
Yeah, we'll give you half a point for that.
That's being very
So
generous.
5.5. Not bad.
That's okay.
Not
I
bad.
mean, that first question was really hard.
I don't know. I knew it before. I knew it before researching it. But yeah, anyway, good job.
That's not bad.
Anyway,
I'll take that.
Frosty, I want to thank you very much for being on the first ever episode of Dom's Film Club, and hopefully we'll be seeing you again for a different movie, maybe one that you choose this time.
Absolutely, yeah, no, I thoroughly enjoyed it, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching our first ever episode of Dom's Film Club. Make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, as well as subscribe to us on our YouTube channel for full video episodes as well as bonus content. For example, next week I'm going to be putting up a video of Frosty and I doing a modern recasting of The Mask of Zorro, and you guys get to decide who did a better job. So see you there.